Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down every single spoiler that has come out today being November 5th, for Commander Legends. So today is the last day of spoilers, which means it's the last day that I'll be breaking down every card, giving you my opinion on them. The new cards I'll go a little bit more in depth in, and the reprints I'll just talk about whether I like the card, what the card does, and all of that. So why don't we just jump right into this? Now, one thing I do have to actually say before we jump into it is that today there were about 80 to 100 cards spoiled, and I am not going to be able to cover all of them. So what I did is I went through and I picked out all of the uncommons and all of the new cards. So some of like the reprints, like I believe there was a 3/2 for 4 in red with Menace, and I'm just like, that's not something I really need to cover. There's not much I can add to it. So I picked about 30 or so cards that I felt were the most impactful, but because I'm not covering all of them, I will leave a link where you can check out all of the cards that were spoiled. So if you want to just quickly scroll through and see if anything pops out at you, you guys can do that. So yeah, there'll be a link down below where you can see that. So starting off, we have Fencing Ace. It's a 2-cost white creature, human soldier, 1/1 with double strike. Generally, this is a pretty powerful card. I mean, it's a reprint from Double Masters. It's a reprint from like Core Set 2020. It's been in a lot of things, and just anything with double strike is pretty good in a deck that cares about boosting up creatures, and there are a lot of white decks that care about that. So in any deck like that, it's pretty decent. Of course, I'm covering here today because it is an uncommon, and I'm covering every single uncommon. So yeah, pretty simple, not really anything that needs to be explained, but it is a pretty good card and something that should not be overlooked, even if it is just so simple. Next we have Make a Stand. It's a 3-cost white instant, and it says creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. And this was a reprint from Core Set 2019. So it'll be in Commander Legend as well. There was an issue with the image, so I'm using the Core Set 2019 one, but it will definitely be there. It's one that's gonna kind of give all your creatures indestructible and boost them. It can be that little bit of extra damage you need, or it can also be that protection against a board wipe. It's pretty decent. I wish it was a little bit more than just creatures. But, you know, for 3 mana, it is not awful. Not a card I definitely want to run, but one that I could definitely see running if I didn't have, like, a Teferi's Protection. Maybe this goes instead. Next we have Open the Armory. This is a 2-cost white sorcery, and it says search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So just a generally pretty good tutor where you're going to go get either aura or equipment. You're probably throwing this in your deck for one of those specifically, but you might throw this in your deck if you have like combo pieces for like a combo you want to do, or if you're just running an artifact or an equipment deck that like needs to get out like Godsend or some very specific artifact to be really, really good, maybe Hammer of Nizan or whatever. Now this does go right in your hand, not on the top of your library. So yeah, it's a pretty good card, and it was only ever printed in Shadows over Innistrad, so it's good to have it see a reprint, as tutors are something that a lot of commander decks want to run, you know, being a 100-card singleton. Next we have Orsov Advocist. It is a 3-cost white creature human advisor, 1/4. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. If a player does, creatures that player controls can't attack you or planeswalkers you control next turn. So essentially you're going to give your opponents the option to kind of make their creatures bigger, but if so, they can't attack you. Issue with this card is that they're going to do that whenever they don't plan on attacking you, and if they were planning on attacking you, they're probably not going to boost up their creature. Of course, this is a little bit of a deterrent, like, hey guys, don't attack me, but you are generally probably going to give them the better end of the deal, and even if they do end up killing your opponents, then they're going to be like, oh, well, now time to kill you, and this becomes practically useless. So, I guess the advantage here is that you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on creatures you control, and the downside is that that creature can't attack you. Or I guess none of your creatures can attack you, which isn't a big deal because you're probably not attacking yourself. So yeah, pretty interesting card. I don't know if I would run it, but I think there's definitely probably a deck that wants to run it. Next, we have Slaughter the Strong. It's a 3-cost white sorcery, and it says each player chooses any number of creatures they control with total power 4 or less, and then sacrifices all other creatures. So if they have 3 1 or 4 1/1s, they can say 4 1/1s and sacrifice the rest. If they have 1/4 CMC, they can just choose to keep that one, and they can do a 3 and a 1, a 2 and a 2, a 4 and a 0 if they have like an Ornithopter out. Generally, it's an okay card, but you probably would rather just pay an extra mana and just board wipe everything, unless your deck really revolves around keeping a creature on the board while everything else dies. So that's like the one big advantage here. The issue is there's a chance that you're trying to kill things that like are very just small utility creatures that can just be kind of saved. You know, you save your like death trigger kind of payoff, and then the rest die, and then you're like, oh well, now they still have it and I just took a bunch of damage. So not my favorite card, but it's also not one that I would just like say I would never put in a deck. I think in the right deck, maybe one where you have like partners and they both have like converter mana cost 2 or something, and you want to be able to keep both your partners, or I guess just a commander with CMC 4 or less that is just very important to stay on the battlefield. I could definitely see the argument for running this. Alright, next we have Triumphant Reckoning. It's a 9-cost white sorcery, and it says return all artifact, enchantment, and planeswalker cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So yeah, this is similar to like a black effect, except like Rise of the Dark Realm, except it doesn't hit your opponents, which is a little bit disappointing, although I think if it did, it would be insane. The advantage here is that you're actually, or I guess the difference here is you're not actually getting creatures. Instead, you are getting artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers. So I could totally see this being put into many planeswalker decks as kind of a, they're the permanent that's probably going to get blown up the most if you're running a lot of them, because, well, they can be directly attacked, where your artifacts and enchantments can't. But I could definitely see like a self-mill, boom, Triumphant Reckoning, here are 30 billion planeswalkers, some artifacts, and some enchantments. Doubling Season is already wanting to be played, so definitely, probably not in a mono-white deck, but if you're throwing this in like a planeswalker deck, it could be something pretty interesting. Next we have Thirst for Knowledge. It's a 3-cost blue instant. It says draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. So just pretty good card. It's a reprint from Double Masters. It lets you either cycle through your deck if you really want to, or if you're actually running an artifact deck, it's a not awful spell. It also is just really good at getting to your combos, or at least decent at getting to your combos, and can also like do draw triggers. So if you have a deck that cares about like when you draw your second card, whenever you draw a card, this can also work really well there too. Next we have Gilt Leaf Winnower. It's a 5-cost black creature elf warrior with menace, and when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target non-elf creature whose power and toughness aren't equal. So it's an elf that's going to help with your elf, tribal. It's a warrior that can help with your like warrior tribal, and it's also a kill spell. So it is a little bit specific. First off, they have to be non-elves, and then also their power and toughness have to be different. Do I think that this is a good card? Probably not. But if you are running an elf deck, it may not be an awful inclusion. Maybe that's something I should look at, is what cards, even in just this batch of spoilers, have different power and toughness, because it's not that common, actually. Next we have Revenant. It's a 5-cost black creature spirit with flying, and it says its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this is one where power and toughness would be equal, but yeah, not awful. I mean, it's a reprint from Magic Origins. It's good in a deck that's going to throw great creatures in your graveyard, but I feel like there are better payoffs for 5, for instance, returning one of those creatures than having big creatures in your deck, or I'm sure there are just much better options for things you might want to do if your graveyard's packed. But if you are running one of those decks, and here's the thing, I say there are better options. Yes, there are better options. That's like me saying, hey, why are you running, this Signet when you could be running Mana Crypt? Obviously, there are going to be better options for a lot of different cards, but, what the value of these cards being reprinted is that, some person who plays just casually with their friends can go out, buy a pack, and then, oh, now I have another payoff, and now I maybe want to build this deck where I throw creatures in my graveyard. And while it's not the best payoff I could have, it's another one, and it's just expanding collections, so I think it's definitely a good thing. Next we have Burning Anger. It's a 5-cost red enchantment aura. Enchanted creature has tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. That's an insane effect. Unfortunately, it costs 5, which means that you probably spent a lot of mana on a certain creature. You're probably enchanting like one of your cheapest creatures you have. That way, if they blow it up, it's not that big of a deal. Or you're enchanting something that can has hexproof or whatever, something along those lines. Maybe something with the death touch, so that it just becomes a tap, kill target creature, or, the fact that this can go face. If you put this, actually, you're probably not putting this on a small creature because it does it based on power. So you're probably, put this on a 10/10, tap 10 damage to any target, including people, planeswalkers, creatures. Pretty crazy card. Again, unfortunately, you're going to get 2 for 1 pretty easily with this. Next, we have Explosion of Riches, which is a new card. It's a 6-cost red sorcery, and it says draw a card, then each other player may draw a card. Whenever a card is drawn this way, Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to target opponent chosen at random from among your opponents. So, you're going to pay 6, you're going to draw a card and deal 5 damage to a random opponent. But then, say someone's over there at 80 life and they don't care if they lose more life, they want to draw a card, they're going to draw a card, and now 5 damage and then another 5 damage. And then let's say everyone's like, well, since they're going to draw cards, we might as well draw cards. And then you get 4 people drawing cards, you're going to get to deal 20 damage. It's definitely a political card in my opinion, but, I think it has a lot of interesting potential to create interesting and dynamic gameplay where it's like, oh, do I draw the card? Do I not? Do I try to convince my opponent to draw the card? Do I just want to draw a card and deal 5 damage to an opponent? Obviously, drawing a card and dealing 5 damage to an opponent probably isn't worth 6, but, it's kind of just a cantrip at that point that just deals 5 damage. I maybe would pay 5 at most for that, but the fact that it creates such an interesting gameplay, I think, kind of makes up for that. Next, we have Fathomless Fleet Swordjack. It's a 4-cost red creature orc pirate, and when he attacks, it deals damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking equal to the number of artifacts you control. It's kind of a very common effect in red now, where you attack, you're dealing damage to the thing you attack, before combat even happens now. And, this is just caring about artifacts. It's a nice theme for that, or it matches up with that theme. On top of that, it's a pirate. On top of that, the artifact counting counts treasures, which are kind of a thing in this. And then it also has Encore, so this can support self-mill, pirate, artifacts, treasures, and I guess even just creatures dying. So just lots of crazy things that this supports, and you can tell it's clearly in here to support many different themes. Next, we have Frenzied Saddlebrute. It's a 5-cost red creature orc warrior 5/4 with haste, and it says all creatures can attack your opponents and planeswalkers your opponents control as though those creatures had haste. So the idea here is that, you're encouraging your opponent. You're like, oh yeah, you got this 4/4. It doesn't really have haste, but if you don't swing at me, it can swing this turn. And I think that's a really interesting concept. On top of that, it's not an awful creature. I mean, I don't like playing 5/4s with haste for 5 in Commander, but obviously this has another ability. It's not like it's some 2/2 for 5 that has that ability. So I could definitely see the argument of running this, and I think in a limited sense, this could be a pretty crazy thing. I mean, your opponents have to constantly be worried about, oh, what can everyone haste out, where you don't really have to worry about that at all, and so it makes your opponents play much more defensively, which then may actually make them use this haste less, which then means, you're probably gonna get attacked less. Either way, just lots of interesting things that you can do with this, and again, it's creating these dynamic situations where not every time you play the card, it'll be the same. Next, we have Lightning Rig Crew. This is a reprint from Ixalan. It's a 3-cost 0/5 Goblin Pirate, and you can tap to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever you cast a pirate, untap it. This clearly is just supporting the pirate theme, and maybe even just a direct damage theme, but we'll have to do maybe an analysis of the limited environment. If you want to see that, let me know. I have a schedule of videos I'm planning on doing, and right now that isn't in it just because these next 2 weeks are going to be kind of crazy with Commander Legends and and Kaladesh Remastered coming out. So I'll be covering all of that, so hit that subscribe button to see all of that. But yeah, if you want to see me talk about the limited themes of the set, let me know. I originally was going to do it, but then when Aether Revolt, when Kaladesh Remastered was announced to be coming out the same week as pre-release for Commander Legends, that kind of threw a wrench and everything. So if you'd want that, I can maybe do move some things around, but let me know. Next we have Volcanic Dragon. This one, 6 cost, 4/4 flying haste. Very generic, very boring. Next, we have Volcanic Torrent. It's a 5-cost red sorcery with Cascade, so you're going to get something that's either 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0 from your library. And then it deals X damage to each creature and Planeswalker. Your opponents control, where X is the number of spells you cast this turn. So on its face, it's going to be most likely at least 2 damage to each thing, and you're getting whatever the second spell was. But maybe this is an interesting kind of like Storm card where you can cast a bunch of spells. Maybe you Cascade. The thing is, if you Cascade into this, for instance, so if you do a 7-drop and then you Cascade into Volcanic Torrent and then you Cascade into a 4-drop, which then cascades into a 2-drop, you get this interesting, you've so far cast 3 spells this turn. Actually, it's casting, so you would have cast 4 spells, and then it does 4 damage to each creature and Planeswalker your opponent's control. So it's this like 4 damage asymmetrical board wipe that also gets out your other stuff. Pretty interesting. I think in a Cascade deck, it probably is fitting in there, and so I think that's pretty fun. Next, we have Monstrous Onslaught. It's a 5-cost green sorcery, and it says it deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control as you cast the spell. So just a green board wipe that generally works pretty well. So if you're in green, like mono green, pretty good option for a board wipe. Next, we have Ordeal of Nylea, 2-cost, green enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice Ordeal of Nylea. Whenever you sacrifice Ordeal of Nylea, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. So it's gonna kind of be a delayed ramp spell that is gonna also boost up your creatures. The thing is, I either want to boost up a creature or ramp. I don't want to be forced to boost up a creature when I want to ramp and be forced to ramp when I boost up a creature, so I don't like this card. Next, we have Scaled Behemoth, 6-cost, 6/7 with hexproof. Just, they needed some big creatures to throw in there, and this is one of those. Next, we have Stinger Fling Spider, 5-cost, 2/5 with reach, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature with flying. Not bad. A lot of the more scary commanders probably have flying. On top of that, flying as a theme is something in the set, so that's something to keep an eye out. And worst case scenario, it is a 2/5 for 5 with reach. It's a spider, so maybe you can do some tribal things with it. It is a reprint, so I'm really just looking at it from a limited perspective. If you could sideboard in limited, you can see sideboard and limited, obviously, but if it was a bigger thing, I would say this is just meant to be a limited card, but I don't know exactly what they're going for with this, other than there are flyers, so maybe this is a good inclusion. Next, we have Strength of the Pack. It's a 6-cost green sorcery, and it says put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Pretty bad outside of limited. Inside of limited, it could probably win you the game, but if you have enough creatures where this makes an impact, you probably had enough creatures to just win the game already. Although that's not always true, by the way, but there are either way better effects. I think there's one that puts 2 counters on everything and then doubles the number of counters, or maybe a counter on everything and then doubles the number of counters. Pretty insane. Next, we have a new card with Hamza, Guardian of Avacyn. It's a 6-cost green and white legendary creature, Elephant Warrior, 5/5. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So, you have 4 creatures, put a counter on each of them, boom, this is now a 2-drop 5/5. But it gets better. It says creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. This is actually a really fun card, and I am probably going to build this deck. I kind of now wish this was coming to like MTG Arena where I could build a brawl deck around it. But there are some really interesting things you can do with it. For instance, there are lots of infinite combos when it comes to reducing the casting cost of creatures. So I would not be surprised if that, is somehow involved with something here. But on top of that, it's just an interesting Selesnya kind of commander. It's not just I'm going to create lots of tokens or I like counters. It's like a mix of I like counters and whoa, look at all these creatures, and whoa, look at these big creatures. So I think there's some really interesting things you could do with this. Next, we have Carador Ghost Chieftain. It's an 8-cost, white, black, green, legendary creature, Centaur Spirit, 3/4, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. So if you mill yourself 5, he costs only 3, and then it says during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard. This is going for about $24, so it's clearly wanted, and I think that could be due to supply issues or something, but I personally would rather play Muldrotha, who will give me the ability to cast more than just creatures, but the ability for this to be be reduced in cost, I think really adds to its playability. So it's definitely a playable card. I just prefer the Muldrotha effect. Next we have Zaydru, the Greathearted. It's a 4-cost, white, blue, and red legendary creature Minotaur Monk, 2/4, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of permanents you own that your opponents control. So for everything you give to your opponent, you're kind of drawing a card and gaining a life, and then you can pay a blue, a red, and a white to give your opponent something. Now, this may look like an awful card, but the fun thing about it is when you combine it with things that you don't want. For instance, there are a decent amount of cards that like do something on ETB that's great, but then as a downside are like sitting around, or even cards such as ETB do something cool and then don't do anything else, or at least do something very, very, very minimal, and you can just give those to your opponent. Another example is like, cards that say you lose the game if they leave the battlefield. You can give them to them with Zaydru and then maybe Cyclonic Rift them away. On top of that, just giving them things they don't really want is kind of fun, and I think it would be an interesting deck. And, it wasn't an expensive card. It wasn't an expensive card before, but it is nice to get, again, more people's hands on it. A lot of people don't buy singles, and so the only way they're getting new cards is opening packs. Next we have Sisay's Ring. It's a 4-cost artifact, tap, add colorless, colorless. Of course, this is worse than Soul Ring and Mana Crypt and all that, but in a more casual group, I could totally see this being a valid spell that actually is pretty good. I mean, ramping for 2 is no joke. You're essentially just paying 2 mana for this spell because you will get that 2 mana right away. I wish this did something a little bit more, but I understand this is a reprint from 7th edition, though I think if it was printed today, it would say like when it ETBs Scry or something. That seems like something this artifact would do, but yep, reprint, pretty cool. I believe it's using the original art, which is kind of cool, saying that it's had other art as well, so pretty awesome. Next we have Burnished Heart. It's a 3-cost artifact creature elk. It's a 2/2, and you can pay 3 and sack it to search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So it's basically colorless ramp, and because of that, it is an awesome card, and that's why it is, here, it's not a new card. I don't know why it says new card, but it is not a new card. It has been reprinted many times before, and it's good to see it in extended art. Next we have Angelic Armaments. It's a 3-cost artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has flying, and is an angel. Pretty generic, just, we're gonna boost up creatures, helps with like combat heavy themes. It also helps with angel theme, and it also helps with the flying theme, and it also helps with the artifact theme. Again, it's one of those artifacts that is just very useful to a lot of different themes. Brass Herald is a 6-cost artifact creature golem 2/2, and it's as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. He enters the battlefield, and then you reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all creature cards of the chosen type revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. So it's really expensive for what it's doing, but if you're doing a tribal thing, it is another nice inclusion, and it hasn't been reprinted since 8th edition, so getting more copies out there is a good thing. Next we have Codex Shredder. It's a 1-cost artifact, and it says tap, target player mills a card. It could be you, could be your opponent. And then you can pay 5, tap, and sack it to return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Actually not awful in a mill deck, because or self-mill deck, I should say, because a lot of self-mill decks are like trying to win with a Thassa's Oracle or Laboratory Maniac, and there is a chance that you like mill your Laboratory Maniac or Thassa's Oracle. The advantage to this card, of course, is that you can be milling yourself passively with that tap ability, and when it comes time that you need your Thassa's Oracle, you can activate Codex Shredder to get that back. So it's kind of helping you mill, and then when you need your piece back, if you accidentally mill it, you can kind of just return it back to your hand. So I think that's definitely an interesting card because of that kind of feature of it. Next we have Dreamstone Hedron. It's a 6-cost artifact that lets you tap for colorless, 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 and then you can pay 3, tap, and sack it to draw 3 cards. Honestly, not awful. There could be some argument that like Gilded Lotus is a better card, but the ability to sack it when you no longer need the mana is pretty good. The issue is it always feels bad to first off spend 4 mana. I mean, spending 4 mana to draw 3 cards, not awful. The issue comes when you are spent 6 mana for the artifact and now you just lost access to 3 mana. So yeah, in certain decks this is good, just it always feels bad to activate that ability, and if you don't want to activate that ability, just use Gilded Lotus, which will give you colored mana and cost less. Next we have Grafted War Gear. It's a 3-cost artifact equipment. A creature gets +2/+2, and whenever it becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent. Not good at all. The advantage is you have equip 0, so you can kind of just sacrifice all of your creatures if you want, but unless your deck is really combo focused, you're not really going to be doing that. Next, we have Hero's Blade. It's a 2-cost artifact equipment, and it says equip creature gets +3/+2. Whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Hero's Blade to it. So it's an artifact that you're probably never going to pay the equip cost for. In a limited environment, it's pretty good, but outside of that, in like constructed commander, unless you're playing, again, in a very casual group, I really don't see this doing very well. Next, we have Lore Seeker's Stone. Is a 6-cost artifact, and you can pay 3 and tap to draw 3 cards, and then this ability costs 1 more to activate for each card in your hand. So for instance, if you have a hand of 7 cards, this costs 10 mana, and that's good because you're not going to want to spend 10 mana to activate the card because you have cards in your hand. But when you get down to 1 or 0 cards, paying 3 mana to draw 3 cards is not a bad deal at all, especially on a repeatable thing. The one issue I have, though, is that you're often going to probably play this for 6, and then it's just going to sit there. You're not going to be able to activate it right away unless it's like the last card out of your hand. It is probably sitting there for at least a little bit. Of course, if you're in an artifact deck, maybe you care about the fact that you cast it or that it's on the battlefield. So it does have that going for it, but it definitely feels similar to an enchantment where it's just going to ETB and just do nothing right away. Versus like, and obviously it doesn't have to. You could activate it right away, but 9 mana and then you draw 3 cards and then you kind of just sit there on the 3 cards because you're probably out of mana because you probably don't have like 13 mana. So yeah, pretty good, but I do see some issues with it. Next, we have a Pennon Blade. It's a 3-cost artifact equipment, and it says equip creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. Pretty good in any deck that's going to go wide. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. The equip cost is a little high for my liking, though. We have Shimmermere. This is a 3-cost artifact creature mirror, 2/2 with flash, and it says you may cast artifact spells as though they had flash. And it was actually rare from Commander 2016, but it got downshifted to uncommon, which, I mean, puts it into what, Artisan, technically, if you play that in paper. But yeah, kind of interesting to see it get downshifted, and I wonder what it'll do to the price. Next, we have Sunset Pyramid. It's a 2-cost artifact, and it enters the battlefield with 3 brick counters on it. You can pay 2 and tap to remove a brick counter from it and draw a card, or you can pay 2 and tap to scry 1. This is very, very similar to Mazemind's Tome that we have right now, where essentially it enters the battlefield. You can tap it to scry 1, or you can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, and then every time you do that, you're putting a page counter on it. And then when it gets up to 4 page counters, you sack it, gain 4 life. Now, the difference here is that, first off, the scry on Mazemind is free, but the other advantage this one has is that scrying can be done in a limited amount of times. You can draw your cards with Sunset Pyramid, and then continue to scry afterward infinitely. It doesn't have to have a brick counter on it. So I think it definitely has some comparisons to Mazemind Tome. I think in a more aggressive format, Mazemind Tome is better from the more recent sets, but I think this also has some merit. Alrighty guys, so that's it for today's spoilers, and actually for my coverage of Commander Legends spoilers, but that's not it for Commander Legends. Tomorrow there should be a video going out where I talk about the most expensive cards in the set that you can be watching out for when you open packs, and we're gonna do a bunch of fun Commander stuff and Kaladesh Remastered stuff coming up, so subscribe if you want to see that, like this video if you enjoyed, leave your comments on and thoughts on all of this in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.